So good morning, everybody. Does it work? Yeah. Okay. So welcome to our Ambassadors Roundtable, which is the kickoff event of our conference about sustainable democracy for the next 2 days. So let me start with the bad news, although Peter said that we should also try to come up with some positive aspects, but nevertheless. According to the Democracy Index of the Economist Intelligence Unit, the state of democracy is at the lowest point since the index was created in 2006, with only 45% of the global population living in some sort of democracy and only 6% living in full democracy. 6%. This is not a very high ratio. The decline in the past years is explained by, and the experts, by the negative impact of COVID-19. But more trouble is ahead. Europe is facing an unprecedented crisis this winter and this fall, with energy shortages, inflation, insecurity, and a war raging in our immediate neighborhood. All these factors could easily undermine public support in democratic parties and governments and institutions, fuel populism, and further aggravate polarization, which is already existing in our societies. We will discuss these challenges ahead, but we also hope to offer you some kind of best practices or hope how to make democracies resilient to those challenges with our distinguished guests. I will introduce them again just to make sure that you have it all right. So Mr. Tibor Bial, ambassador from the Czech Republic, Agnese Kalnina, ambassador from Latvia, Ms. Desiree Bonis, ambassador of the Netherlands, Mr. Hartelius, ambassador of Sweden, and Mr. Paul Fox, ambassador of the United Kingdom. And my name is Inotai, and I will moderate this discussion. So let's start with the first question. We will have like around 45-50 minutes, and then about 10 minutes or 15 minutes for questions from the floor. So you will get your chance to ask your questions at the end. So less than a week ago, the European Parliament adopted a resolution which said Hungary is no longer a full democracy. In the EU, there are also serious concerns about other countries backsliding in Poland, but sometimes other countries are also criticized. So my first question would go to Ambassador Bial from the Czech Republic. Would you agree with the statement that democracies in Central and Eastern Europe are somehow less resilient to autocratic tendencies? And how do you see the challenges ahead of your country in this winter?
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. Thank you to be here and to have the possibility to speak about those important questions. I would like to pick it from another point of view, because societies in Central and Eastern Europe has kind of a different historical experience with the democracy, with the authoritarian regimes. It's only so we had lived under the communist era or the totalitarian regime for more than 40 years. So those people who are at least 45 years in our region have lived a significant part of their life under this regime. So for us it means maybe a little bit else as for our friends from the western part of Europe, for example, because we has not got the democracy for free or as a present, but we all had to fight for it. So, I mean, in our society, there are still people who interpret this transformation to democracy differently, because there were people who were victims of the previous regimes. There were people who benefited from the previous regime, so that's why they interpret the previous system differently. But we have to tell that, of course, during those 30 years, I think we did our best to transform our countries to the full democratic countries. In our countries are free elections to all democratic institutions. So the judicial system works. The rule of law, the human rights are working in our countries, but we are still not so close as to our western part of Europe, to our friends, as we wished earlier. So maybe from this point of view, there are people who are a little bit confused from this, and there are people who understood that we have still to work, and maybe more hardly work, to reach the same level as it is in other parts of Europe. So in the first round, I would like to say that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you touched upon an important thing, that we have to keep on fighting. We have to keep on strengthening those institutions. So let me just ask Mr. Agnese Kalnina from the ambassador of Latvia. The Czech Republic and the Baltic states are usually viewed as the strongest democracies of our region, Central and Eastern Europe. What would you say the key challenges would be for your country and your democratic institutions coming up this autumn? Latvia is in a very particular geopolitical situation. When we just looking at the map, just seeing that the war is like not really so far. And are there any best practices you can share with us? How is Latvia trying to safeguard its democratic institutions?
Yeah, thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. It is my pleasure to be here and speak about sustainable democracy and Latvia's experience and good lessons learned about this whole process. And already my colleague mentioned about our history, about our historical experience with Soviet regime, which unfortunately has done a lot of harm in our society as well. If we look at our, democracy, sustainability, and how we view it today, of course, there is a part of society which still has some longing, probably, for this authoritarian kind of rule. But what I can see in younger people, and which kind of makes me more optimistic right now, is that younger people are more for democracy, and we actually are going to have parliamentary elections in a week's time. So prognosis look quite good right now, and I hope that it stays that way, so we can furtherly develop our democracy. Our good lessons learned, I would say, is fight for objective information. I think this is one of the cornerstones in democratic society, in keeping democracy alive. It is to give possibility for people to access free, plural, objective information, and not to take it away from them, and not to disseminate disinformation, which unfortunately we have experienced in our country as well. Up until February, up until the war, we had a lot of Russian TV channels in Latvia, which were kind of used by Russian-speaking minority for gathering information, for finding out information about events going on in neighboring countries, and also a lot of disinformation was distributed about our own country, about our political system. And what we see now, when we close those immediately, all of them, it changes. It changes also in this part of society, which mostly would like to, speak and use this information in Russian language. And I think this is very important step, and we have really made it like a governmental whole society approach. It means, giving a good basis for free media to work. We have also invited some independent media from Russia, also, of course, Ukrainian journalists to work in Latvia. So I would say free information and fight against disinformation and educating people. I think this is also a very important thing if we speak about sustainable democracy. We need to educate ourselves, like every day. We need to develop our ability to think critically, and which is something which we didn't have back then. In Soviet times, somebody always told you what to do and what to think. And this could be a big change in our societies, in Central Europe, in Eastern Europe, to switch this switch and to start to think ourselves, to analyze ourselves. And of course, it's not always the easiest way to do things. And if we speak about challenges, challenges are the same, I would say, if we look at the coming winter. Of course, inflation, growing prices of energy. Of course, we have also done a lot to diversify from Russian gas, from Russian oil. We could have probably done it sooner, but then again, maybe at that time somebody would say, okay, it's not economically, proven at that moment. So we had a lot of discussions back in Latvia on those issues. But right now we are doing everything we can so that we diversify, we go away, we find alternative ways. And but challenges will be there, of course. And government is also thinking about how to deal with it, with some help for citizens and things like that. So yes, I would stop here right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Education, critical thinking, those are key terms, and I hope we can get back to that. But let me turn to Ambassador Hartelius from Sweden. The ambassador from Latvia mentioned that elections are coming up. You already had elections in Sweden. In Western Europe, we have been witnessing a tendency in the last decade that political parties which are labeled populist or extremist get in the forefront or excel in elections. In Sweden, which is one of the few full-fledged democracies of the world, the Sweden Democrats have just become the second largest party in the country. Is this a threat to democracy, or how shall we interpret such developments?
Thank you, Edith. First, a few fact numbers related to the elections that were held on the 11th of September. We could see that two parties made clear gains in the elections. One was, as you mentioned, Edith, the Sweden Democrats, who achieved just over 20%. The other party that gained was the Social Democrats, also added a couple of percentage points. I would normally, after elections, most parties present themselves as winners in some sense, but I think two other parties did as well, the Green Party and the Liberal Party, who managed to stay in parliament because they were counted out earlier this year. So majority-wise in the parliament, the majority is shifted from the center-left, the Green Left government, who had one seat majority, to a new team of parties on the center-right with a majority of 3. So that's the first observation. It's difficult to talk about any radical changes so far when it comes to numbers and changes in sympathies for parties. Second thing is that we still don't know what kind of government we will get and what policy it will develop. The only thing that's sure is that we will have a new government because the old one resigned last week. And now we have a caretaking government. The parliament will open on Tuesday next week, and then it could be a vote on a candidate for a prime minister who will then have to shape his, will probably be he, coalition. But it's still up in the air exactly what kind of constellation we'll have and what kind of policies they will develop. So that was just to give you some factual background as to numbers. Maybe a bit less drama than sometimes painted in media, both at home and abroad. Second point is this, because you quoted Edith, Sweden is usual not the place for these kind of parties. Now, looking around, and what we normally do in the north of Europe, we very often compare to our Nordic peers, because these 5 countries, Iceland, Norway, Finland, Sweden, and Denmark, are very similar in many, many senses. And there, if you look back a couple of years, you will find that in Norway, in Denmark, and in Finland, we've had, I wouldn't compare these parties completely, but parties of a similar nature, often with a few questions at the heart, often related to migration, often, at least by the media, been labeled as sort of populist or populist style. They've been in supporting the government. They've sometimes been in government coalitions. They've been around 18, 19, 20, 25% even when it comes to support. Iceland a bit less. The People's Party there around 10%. So, and still, and this has happened over the last at least 10 years or more. And still my observation would be that if you look at the international rankings of democracy, of transparency, of media freedom, exactly the same countries still are on the top. And then you could ask the question, and I may not go into Western Europe, I stay in the Nordic. What could be the answer, the reason behind this? What are the factors? You can find other elements in the society where the same countries rank very high. Trust. What the Nordic Council Ministers calls the Nordic gold. We have in all these countries, I think Finland is in the lead, very high trust level towards the institutions and between people also, between individuals. That's something that's been built over a long time, based in turn on a number of reasons. I won't go into them. There's also when it comes to transparency, openness, access to public information, also very high, and when it comes to media freedom. I think these are factors that when we're coming back to the key question for this theme, sustainable democracy, if these factors, trust and transparency, access to information, thus also accountability, are high, you can actually have a sustainable democracy even when you change political majorities. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Well, this is a very, very nice picture. I'm afraid we are very far from that in Hungary. Trust, transparency, media freedom, but this is probably a topic for another panel. Let me turn to Ambassador Desiree Bonis from the Netherlands. The Netherlands is also a country which ranks usually very high in all democratic rankings. Would you say there is any threat to this very established democracy at the moment, and how does the Netherlands prepare its society, its democratic institutions to fight off autocratic, authoritarian tendencies? Because probably you have to make the society resilient, not just the institutions. What's the best practice from the Netherlands?
Is it on? Yeah. Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here, and I would like to commend the CEU for organizing this fantastic Budapest Sustainable Democracy Forum. The second time, last time I just arrived to Budapest, been here now for 1 year, and I was in the audience, and I'm happy now to participate in this panel discussion with my dear colleagues from several countries. And I think already one very interesting element is that you can see that the history of countries, where you come from, is so important in establishing where you are right now. You've given very good examples of that, and for the Netherlands, I think there's also, in our history, there are a few traits that make us the way we are right now. One is that, as you may know, most of our country actually had to be literally created by ourselves. 2/3 was below sea level, and we, by land reclamation, we created Holland in a way. And I think that already, the fact that early on, like 12th, 13th century, we had water boards, which were local authorities establishing forms of cooperation between citizens, were extremely important in our history. They had to cooperate. They had to find ways of making progress together. And still, the Netherlands is a very, very decentralized country. We have almost 350 municipalities. They work by the principle of subsidiarity. That means that whatever can be delegated to the local level will be delegated. And I'm talking about housing, I'm talking about social benefits like unemployment assistance, childcare. All these institutional arrangements are made at the local level. So this element of subsidiarity is very important. Let me just give you a few examples of, and they happen to be in the area of sustainability, which makes it nice. I know you'll talk about that more tomorrow. But some examples of current day cooperation at the local level are, for example, in Amsterdam, we have zero waste labs. People can actually bring their waste there. They'll get some sort of currency and they can buy stuff in shops that are related to this network. And the whole idea is that we are upcycling our waste. You know, it's striving for a more circular economy. And by the way, you may be aware that the Netherlands has already a 26% circular economy. So a quarter of all the stuff we use has already been recycled. I think that's quite a feat. There are others also from Rotterdam. There's a climate agreement with more than 100 organizations participating to make the city more climate friendly. Eindhoven University developed a network of a few local communities that produce and sell their own electricity, which is quite a new concept. So you're not only a consumer as a citizen, but also a producer. And that may be a model for the future, all at the local level. I should say also there is no country in the world where people are so, at such a high level, organized in terms of being a member of an association, a foundation, it may be fishing association, or it may be political, creative, sports. We have the highest rate of being organized in volunteer organizations. The number of volunteers is also extremely high. And I think this all touches about what was mentioned already by colleagues, and especially your intervention, Dag, trust. It is extremely important. Trust as social capital. That was even the title of a book in the 90s, was it Fukuyama? But I've always remembered trust as social capital. It is a resource. When there's trust in institutions, we have a very high level of tax paying, but we pay it voluntarily, won't say with pleasure, but we believe in the system because we do get lots of good things back for these taxes. Education, good roads, healthcare, all this. So trust is very important. If I may still, because your question was the threats, of course there are threats. Democracy is a dynamic process. It's never finished. We have to work for it. This was also mentioned. It is something that you have to believe in, that you have to work for. So current day threats, typically, some of them have been mentioned already, are internally, well, that is specifically for Holland, I would say. We have a nitrogen crisis. Perhaps many of you have not heard of it yet, but this is a product produced by, for example, farms, but also industry. And the nitrogen levels in the Netherlands are currently extremely high, far too high for our health, so they have to come down. And this is a fierce political debate at the moment, with farmers on their trucks driving to the Binnenhof in the Hague, with really severe actions being taken. It's a debate, it's a democratic debate, as an example. Housing is a big problem for young people, students in the bigger cities. Of course, as was said before, inflation, energy, food prices, the war in Ukraine, instability, climate, all these are new pressures and we have to find a way. And I think the key word here is resilience. You have to prove that you are resilient. Therefore also I fully adhere to the importance of free media. there must be a debate in public. And what we see now is by social media, for example, that many of these debates are amplified. And I'm not sure really whether that is always so helpful. Because you polarize that way, you create different bubbles, everybody is reaffirmed in their own bubble. That is not a real debate. So I think social media can sometimes play a dubious role. And then, of course, this very threatening point of disinformation, of framing, of trolling, which is very scary. And we don't have the answers to that at all. And I hope to find some here today in this lovely debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So there were a couple of key points. I think we could have complete different discussions, new panels on disinformation, civil engagement, decentralization, and the trust. I think trust is again emerging as the most important factor to make democratic societies resilient to all those autocratic tendencies. So maybe we should have a panel later on about trust and how to build trust, or at the next conference organized by the municipality. So let me turn to Ambassador Fox from the UK. Well, the UK is one of the oldest democracies of the world, although there is always this debate who is the oldest and how do we count it. But Ambassador Fox, are we too complacent? Do citizens actually care about democracy nowadays, or all they want is to have strong leaders who protect us from all evils of the world? How does the society or the people relate to democracy?
Well, thank you for that easy question. First of all, I'd like to thank the organisers of this, thank Peter, thank the CEU, and I'd also like to congratulate the Mayor on his speech. So well done, sir. It's an interesting question, and I would say that there's only one thing harder than establishing a democracy, and that is maintaining it. And one word has cropped up, but I think we need to flag this up even further, which is institutions. I think in order for there to be a flourishing democracy, you have to have strong institutions. So that means an executive which is held to an account. That means a legislature which is freely and fairly chosen. It also means an independent judiciary which is able to implement the rule of law. And I would include in this also an independent media which is able to express its opinions freely, and also a very active civil society. And you can establish these, but as we've already heard, you have to work really, really hard to maintain them, and especially in difficult times. Are we complacent? Yeah, I think we are to a certain extent, but I'm also fairly hopeful, because when I look at the alternatives, I don't think they offer much. I mean, Winston Churchill famously said that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others, and I think he's pretty right there. But what we are facing now, and I think it is about trust, it is about faith, it is about belief. I mean, I think in the last 15 or 20 years, faith in democracy, faith in institutions, faith in our leaders has declined. And you can ask why that is, but one thing you can say, one of the consequences is it creates a vacuum. If people distrust their institutions, if they distrust their leaders, if they feel that they're being marginalised, if they believe that somebody is exploiting the situation for their own benefit, you'll get a vacuum. And you will also get a desire for easy solutions and how can one put it, direct methods. And I think to a certain extent, we have seen that. But the interesting thing is I don't ever see countries which are clearly authoritarian describing themselves as autocratic. They always, dress it up. They're a managed democracy, or they're a people's democracy, or they're in a liberal democracy. They face, and they go through the pretense of democratic practices. I mean, I just think of the Soviet Union. The 1936 constitution was a brilliant constitution, enshrined human rights, democratic practices and all of that. But it meant nothing because of the regime that didn't implement it. I mean, Stalin's Russia didn't do anything that was set out in the 1936 constitution. It was the same in the 1977 constitution of the Soviet Union. So, you know, these places ape democratic norms, which seems to suggest a lack of confidence. You know, they don't really, you know, believe, they don't have the courage of their convictions to sort of say we are autocratic and we're proud of it. And also these sorts of regimes end up being incredibly personalized, whether it's Stalin's Russia, whether it's Mao's China, whether it's Franco's Spain, Mussolini's Italy, Hitler's Germany. And when things become so personalized, when those personalities leave the stage, those regimes tend to collapse. Now, there are two exceptions, obviously, Soviet Russia and Communist China, but I would say they were under intense pressure after those key figures left the stage, and the only thing that saved them was the strength of the only institution which worked in those systems, and that was the party. So, I mean, in a way, even though democracy is under pressure around the world, I'm still very, very hopeful that it will prevail because, well, what other system has developed such prosperity? What other system has allowed people to freely express themselves? What other system has enshrined the individual's rights? So I think the challenge for us now is to rebuild that trust. And it's not going to be easy.
Thank you very much. I have more questions, but I would turn to the audience and see if there is anybody who would like to ask a question. If not, then we can continue with the second round. Yes, there is a question over there. Could we have the mic? Thank you. Would you introduce yourself and just be brief, please?
I will. Carmen Mijay, EU advisor at the moment in Moldova. Excellent presentations about the state of democracy and also about the linkage between democracy and environment, which is particularly welcome since the main sponsor of the event is the Green Mayor of Budapest. But I would also like to ask you about your thoughts on the linkage between democracy and economy, and particularly the economic systems we are running in Europe. Whether there is anything to say about this aspect, having in mind that Europe's competitive edge is slowly but eroding in the world. Thank you. It was short.
Yeah.
I just missed the last few words, and I would like to hear them. What did the gentleman say? Considering that?
The slowly eroding economic edge of Europe in the world.
Losing competitiveness. But I think the question could be approached from prosperity and democracy, whether the two are interlinked, and whether prosperity declines, the faith in democracy perhaps also shrinks.
Can I?
Would you take it? And then Ambassador Hartelius.
Well, I think it's a very nice, good question, and I think there's a very strong relation between democracy and economic prosperity. And I would not so much agree that Europe is at the moment in decline economically, not at all. We're still, if you look at the EU together, we're still the biggest powerhouse, economically speaking, of the world, by far. Bigger than China, bigger than the United States. So that's a fact. Also, I think there may be now, of course, especially in Asia, economies coming up who are not democracies, but we'll have to see how they will fare. They will also meet their crisis. There's volume, which is an important element, obviously, with China, but there are also incredible vulnerabilities and frailties in the Chinese economy, as we've seen over the past few years. Now, back to the link between prosperity and democracy. I think, again, here, trust is very important, transparency is very important. What companies, private companies, are looking for is legal security. They want to be sure, like, okay, if I have a certain tax regime, an investment regime, if I have a conflict with my business partner, will it be solved in a fair way? And so for that, a strong independent judiciary is extremely important, and that's how businesses can flourish. For healthy competition, you need a level playing field. A level playing field can best be realized, of course, in a democracy. Well, just some thoughts. Dag, what would you say?
Yeah, well, I completely agree, of course, but add from another angle, because in order to be competitive, which I tend to believe that Europe still is, and we are in a good way looking at the various initiatives that are being taken in the European Union. But it has much to do about how do we create innovation, how do we create the opportunities for innovation. That, to a large extent, means not only putting a lot of money into research and development, but also create a flexibility on the labor market so that people dare to take new steps, that they can adjust to have. And then we come a little bit back to the question of trust. A trust in society that I can take this jump into a new career. Denmark has introduced the concept of flexicurity. I think that's very, very important to have a labor market where people feel safe and free enough to move along with in line with the developments, and to make it possible to be on the cutting edge in connection with sufficient investment in both education and research and development.
Ambassador Kalnina, you would...
Yes, just briefly to add, I completely agree to what colleagues have already said, but if I speak about my country's experience, we have experienced back then this kind of planned economy, and now since 30 years we are independent democracy, and our prosperity is the best it has ever been. And also, if we look not only like from economical side, because I think we have to connect those things also with freedom and with broader sense of prosperity, also from security, from resilience, from all those things which we mentioned already here. So I would say I'm absolutely voting for democracy in that sense. Thank you.
Ambassador Bial, you are free to react or to comment on what the colleagues said in the previous round. So not just the prosperity question, but if you think you could comment on trust and education and anything like that.
Thank you. Thank you that you mentioned the trust, what you Desiree told, because I think this is also a good phrase how to talk about the economy, about your question, you know, the relation between economy and democracy or democratical institute, because there need to be a trust in between those sides. I'm personally a man who spent at least 15 years at the private sector on the business side, so I see the importance of the economy, of the developing of the business, and later I had a chance to work almost 10 years on the business development between Czech Republic and countries in our region. So I was working in it, and I think that the economical question or the economical diplomacy is one of the main target of our works also nowadays. And as colleagues told that now is this year is a very challenging year with a lot of questions. We again, has to trust in each other, that we are able all together solve these questions, these challenges. And as a last remark, Czech Republic as a actual EU president country, we have 5 priority points, and the 4th point is the strategical strengthening of the EU economic. So it's on the table. We still work on it. So yes, the question is adequate, and I would like to say at the end that I absolutely agree with my colleagues what they said before. Thank you.
Ambassador Fox?
I think this is a really interesting question in the sense of what's the relations between politics and economics. One could be an old star Marxist and say, but basically the political superstructure is determined by the economic base, and it creates a system which is geared towards the interests of a certain class. Or, the other way around is that, the politics creates the environment for a flourishing economy. I think at the heart of this is a debate that's going on, which is our free market system the best model? Are there alternative models which can deliver more effectively and efficiently? And of course, the example people always point to is China, with this notion of state capitalism, state-directed, state-controlled, state-enhanced economic activity. And there are some people in Europe who look at China as a model to follow, who see China as the country of the future, the economy of the future. I'll be honest, I beg to differ. Because the great thing about a free market economy has that ability to adapt. It may take time, but it can also react fairly quickly. Nearly all of the innovations we've seen in the last 200 years have emerged from free economic market activity. Innovation flourishes, technology flourishes. When you look at what's going on in more state-controlled economies like China, that ability to adapt, that ability to change is, I think, limited. I'm happy to be challenged on this. They're very good at delivering very standard things quickly. They can build lots of roads, they can build lots of cities, and so on and so forth. But it doesn't allow for innovation and adaptability because of the political challenges such activity can pose. So, I think the question here is that, is our free market model the best model, and are there really better models available? I would suggest there aren't.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, there is one question here.
My name is Liu Shizhong. I'm Taiwan ambassador to Hungary. Thank you so much for this. In fact, I also like to thank the city of Budapest, especially Mayor Kalnina, to have Taiwan's voice to be heard in this Budapest forum. Later, one of the Taiwan's mayor will address Taiwan's reaction to the most recent Chinese military threat to Taiwan from a local government's perspective. But I would like to emphasize especially the fact that Taiwan has been deepening its relationship with most Central and Eastern European countries and also Baltic countries. So my question is particularly addressed to ambassadors from Czech Republic and also Latvia. Well, there's no doubt that Taiwan society has been relatively, and there's no panic when facing the Chinese most recent military harassment on Taiwan. Not because Taiwanese people are insensitive to those external military threats, but because for decades, Taiwanese society has been able to deepen its democracy and also to reinforce its resilience to such an external security threat. And not to mention, Taiwan accounts for 70% of the global chip-making industry. So I would say that you can never measure a country's power simply by size or territory or population, like a lot of countries in Central and Baltic areas. So my question is especially to the two distinguished ambassadors, that in what way can Taiwan share its experience with those countries in Central Eastern European countries and Baltic? And in what aspect do you think that Taiwan can further team up with those like-minded countries? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. From our point of view, maybe it's known that Czech Republic is supporting this connection. You know, a lot of our representatives were visiting your country. You were visiting our country, so we somehow try to cooperate. So this question, what you gave to us, is from our point of view, is like an open door at the moment. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question. And I think in every case, if we can, share any good experiences about democratic way of living, democratic values, I think it's a good thing, and we should absolutely use this opportunity. But thank you for good words. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last question, if there is any. Yeah, there is a question over there.
Thank you so much for this wonderful forum. I represent Ukraine. And today, during the discussion, it's like a déjà vu for me, because you saw the news from Russia and current statement of Putin. So actually, he's preparing a fake referendum. It's like what happened in 2014, when the Western reaction on the annexation of Crimea was too weak. And today, Ukraine is facing the genocidal war. And decentralization, which was mentioned here, environment protection is also key, important for Ukraine. But first, we have to win the war. And I think winning the war in Ukraine fast means a geopolitical victory for different countries, nations globally. It's also important for Taiwan, democracy and decentralization. What could be done from the West to make democracy more sustainable in the future, to prevent wars? How you could help Ukraine to win faster using local communities and support? Thank you.
Well, another easy question. Ambassador Fox.
I'm happy to tackle that one first of all. My government's clear. We've got to support Ukraine. It's as simple as that. Putin cannot be seen to succeed. So we need to give you, I think, first of all, the military support you need in order to take back your territory. We should call out Putin's actions for what they are. I mean, the announcement yesterday of carrying out these fake referenda, it's, all par for the course. One shouldn't be surprised by it, but I think it's actually an act of desperation. Even though he's never going to admit it, he has massively miscalculated. This is a strategic mistake of gigantic proportions. And I think it's the role of the UK, but I think it's the role of the EU. It's the role of the Western Alliance to ensure that Ukraine gets the support it needs in order to retain its sovereignty and to flourish as a nation with our support. I just want to roll back to a point I made before about personalized regimes and their weaknesses. This is Putin's Russia. And, without Putin, that system would not exist. And, I'm not suggesting, it's not for us to say whether Putin should be in power or not. That's for the Russian people. But what I do say is that when Putin does leave the stage at some point or another, we are going to be faced with the challenge of how to engage with the post-Putin Russia to ensure that it doesn't behave in this way before. And that may require us to think about being, hard to say, more magnanimous to a post-Putin Russia, so we don't make the mistakes we made, I think, in the 1990s. When we talk about resentment towards democracy, perhaps in this part of the world, I think that may stem from mistakes that countries like mine made in the 1990s, in those crucial first decade or so following the collapse of communism in this part of the world.
Ambassador Hartelius, you indicated that you would like to answer.
Yes, thank you. Very important question, an important question for me representing a country has been supporting a European perspective for Ukraine since our first EU presidency in 2001. And we've been running projects over many years for both environmental projects and local development projects, democracy projects in Ukraine. Fully agree with what Paul said. Also a reminder that we need to think already now for the post-war period and for post-war long-term support for Ukraine. Because I think we all agree Ukraine is part of our European future and part of our European stability and peace, that we need to also build up the funds for support, economic support, all kinds of support to the Ukrainian countryside, not only to Kiev, and to work long term and to have maybe 10, 20-year perspective of this, because this will be an investment for us in Europe. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I can only add, as Latvian ambassador, of course, Latvia is a great supporter of Ukraine in all means we can, and absolutely Ukraine must win this war. And what we think is that one part of the problem with Russia is that it has never faced consequences of what it has done already. Let's say, look only at 20th century, at World War II. After World War II, there was no Nuremberg for communist crimes. And this we see as a big, kind of still open page in history, which we would like to close and somehow to deal with it when Russia hopefully will become a bit of a different country. But it's maybe not so easy, as we can see from history, that they kind of always bounce back to this aggressor kind of mindset. But this is one thing which we would really like to see in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for that harrowing question in a way, and I think we all feel your pain, but the sorrow of Ukraine is our sorrow as well. And this terrible war that has been inflicted on you is also a lesson to us all. And a thing that has not been mentioned yet, and that's why I want to raise it, is I think it is also a wake-up call for the West, for democracies, that we should defend ourselves. And all of us are now increasing our defense expenditures, and I think that's a very good thing. It's high time, because we are vulnerable and we need to defend democracies.
Thank you very much. Last remark.
Thank you. If I may start with some addition to Desiree's words, that yes, the democracy is something that has to be taken care of, and we have to always know or realize one very important thing, that in the democracy we do not have only rights and claims, but in the same time we have responsibilities also. And now with this part, responsibility, we have responsibility also in solidarity and to help to your country. And if I can mention, the first point of the 5 priority points of our EU presidency is to help Ukraine. And I do not want to repeat all those words what my colleagues told, but fully agree, and we all feel the same, and we all do everything what we can do, we do our best how to help you, and first and more important question is as soon as possible to reach the peace in your country. And it's also a very important point, because during our presidency till the end of the year, our dream is to organize a meeting of the world leaders in Czech Republic with presence of your president. And it means that when your president can come, it means that there should be peace. So we all work on it and try to do our best. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we will conclude the panel because we are running a bit behind time. As Ambassador Bonis said, the war in the Ukraine is really a wake-up call for our democracies. So we can just hope and do our best to make our democracies resilient, strengthen our democratic institutions. And on this note, I would like to thank all the distinguished ambassadors for being with us here and sharing with us their very useful and important insights of how democracies work and how they should work in the future. Thank you very much for your presence.